Have you ever wondered how someone once full of love, compassion and innocence could one day become unrecognizable, a shell of their former self, consumed by darkness? The transformation from light to shadow is not sudden. It is slow, insidious, and often unnoticed until it's far too late. This is not a story about villains. It's about people like you, like me, people who once smiled sincerely, helped strangers, and believed in goodness. This is about the terrifying truth of how good people become monsters. In the beginning, it always starts with a wound, a betrayal, a humiliation, something deep enough to break the soul, but not loud enough to cry out for help. Trauma becomes the seed, and pain, when left unhealed, festers. Slowly, that pain begins to change a person's perception of the world. Trust becomes foolishness. Kindness becomes a liability. Hope becomes a joke. The heart builds walls where once there were open doors. These changes aren't visible at first, but inside, the soul begins to decay. Psychologically, this is what psychologists call moral disengagement. It's the process through which a person gradually separates their actions from their values. They begin to justify things they once found abhorrent. Small lies become tools of survival. Tiny acts of cruelty become defense mechanisms. The line between right and wrong blurs, not because the person has changed overnight, but because their reality has. Imagine a child who grows up constantly belittled, mocked, or made to feel invisible. That child may begin with innocence, but over time, the repeated message that they are worthless takes root. When the world tells you long enough that you are nothing, eventually you begin to believe it. And once you believe you are nothing, harming others doesn't feel wrong. After all, if no one cared about you, why should you care about anyone else? This is how monsters are born, not through evil acts, but through invisible suffering, through neglect, through accumulated heartbreak. Monsters are not born in shadows. They are shaped in the sunlight, under watchful eyes that never truly see. The most haunting truth? Most of them never intended to become what they did. They were once the kind ones, the ones who stood up for others, who cried when they saw pain. But life has a way of bending even the strongest, and when the bending becomes too much, the breaking begins. So the question is, how far would you go to protect yourself if you truly believed no one else would? How much of your morality would you sacrifice to stop feeling like a victim? And in the pursuit of survival, how many pieces of your soul would you give away? As the transformation progresses, something even more dangerous takes root, the justification of cruelty. What once was unthinkable becomes necessary. And it's not always about harming others. It's about feeling in control, reclaiming power. Vengeance, after all, often wears the mask of justice. A good person wronged, abused, or broken often finds themselves staring into the mirror, not recognizing the growing anger behind their eyes. But they justify it. They deserve it, they say. The world did this to me. And slowly, the victim becomes the villain in their own redemption story. It's important to understand a key psychological mechanism here, cognitive dissonance. When a person's actions contradict their beliefs, they experience discomfort unless they change their beliefs to match their behavior. So, if a good person hurts someone, they must either feel guilt or convince themselves that the person deserved it. Over time, this rationalization becomes habitual. Harm becomes acceptable when it serves a greater emotional purpose. This is where resentment becomes a breeding ground for monstrosity. Resentment is slow poison. It tells you that forgiveness is weakness, that kindness is for fools, and that only through retaliation can you reclaim your dignity. This mindset is seductive, especially when one has been repeatedly silenced, ignored, or invalidated. It is in this emotional war zone that another transformation occurs, the erosion of empathy. Empathy, the very foundation of morality, begins to wither when one's own pain becomes too overwhelming. There's no room left to feel for others when your own wounds scream louder. So the heart shuts down. First, It stops feeling sorrow. Then, it stops feeling anything at all. This emotional numbness may be seen as strength. After all, vulnerability feels dangerous. But it's not strength. It's armor made of trauma. And armor, while protective, also isolates. Those behind the mask of emotional detachment are not strong. They are surviving, barely. And then something terrifying happens. They begin to like the power, the fear in others' eyes, the control, the silence that follows their rage. Power becomes addictive, not because they are evil, but because for the first time they feel seen, heard, respected. And for someone who's felt invisible for too long, respect, even if it's rooted in fear, feels intoxicating. We start to see this in everyday life. The bullied child who grows into the tyrant boss, the abused spouse who becomes controlling, the once faithful friend who turns manipulative. It's not because they were born monsters, it's because they were never taught how to process their pain without passing it on. So, again, the haunting question: how many betrayals does it take before a protector becomes a predator? Monsters don't always live in the shadows, they live among us. They sit beside us in classrooms, work in offices, laugh at family gatherings, and yet behind that smile, behind the polite small talk and practiced charm, lies something else, something darker. This is where the truly terrifying transformation occurs, when the monster learns to wear a mask. This phenomenon is not uncommon. Psychology refers to it as the compartmentalization of the self, the ability to split conflicting parts of one's personality into separate domains. One part remains socially acceptable, friendly, competent, likable. The other cold, calculated, capable of cruelty when necessary. And the most disturbing part, these individuals often believe they're doing what's right. We see this in history. In war, criminals who were once loving fathers. In cult leaders who convinced themselves their manipulation was salvation. In ordinary people who commit unthinkable acts in the name of ideology, justice, or fear. They are not mindless monsters. They are people with just enough morality left to justify their evil. Consider the concept of the banality of evil, coined by philosopher Hannah Arendt. She observed how some of the most heinous atrocities were committed not by sadists, but by seemingly average people, bureaucrats, soldiers, neighbors, who simply followed orders or protected their own interests. Evil in this form isn't loud, it's methodical, rational, sometimes even polite. The danger here lies in the illusion of normalcy. When someone who appears good begins to cross lines, their past kindness buys them the benefit of the doubt. He would never do that, we say. She's always been so nice. And so, their descent into monstrosity continues unchecked, protected by the image they've built. But internally, the cracks deepen. The cost of wearing the mask becomes unbearable. Anxiety, paranoia, and detachment grow. These individuals often feel alienated from themselves, as if living in a role they no longer control. And yet, they continue. Because admitting the truth that they've become something they once feared would destroy them. This psychological dissonance can lead to something even more dangerous: projection. Unable to face their own darkness, they begin to see it in others. They accuse, deflect, and attack. They manipulate reality so they never have to confront their own moral decay. And in doing so, they justify further harm. "I'm only doing this because they made me," becomes the rallying cry of a monster in denial. This is why some of the most dangerous people are not the openly violent, but the quietly broken, those who still believe they are good, because in their minds every cruel act becomes part of a noble crusade, every victim becomes an enemy, and every boundary crossed is a necessary sacrifice for a greater cause, usually their own survival. And so, the good person is gone. Not in body, not in appearance, but in soul. Once the mask becomes second nature, the hunger for control intensifies, not necessarily for power over others in the traditional sense, but control over chaos, unpredictability, and vulnerability. For someone who was once powerless, regaining control becomes an obsession. And that obsession has a price. It starts subtly, controlling conversations, dictating decisions, policing emotions, but it grows until relationships become transactions, love becomes leverage, and the world is seen not as a place of connection, but of dominance. Either you control or you are controlled. At this stage, the person may no longer identify with who they used to be. The past version of themselves, the good, soft, empathetic version, is seen as weak, a liability, something to be buried. This disconnection is what psychologists refer to as ego fragmentation. The individual begins to compartmentalize so deeply that they lose access to essential parts of their identity. One result of this fragmentation is the emergence of shadow behavior, actions driven by repressed emotions and desires that the conscious self refuses to acknowledge. The anger that was never expressed, the grief never processed, the shame never healed, all of it finds expression in cruelty, in manipulation, in vengeance masked as justice. The terrifying part? Sometimes this darkness feels liberating. In abandoning their conscience, they feel untethered, free, no more guilt, no more second-guessing, no more fear of betrayal. But that freedom is a lie. It's not liberation, it's numbness, a psychological armor so thick that nothing gets in, but nothing gets out either. Relationships suffer. Intimacy becomes impossible. Trust, a foreign concept. At this point, the person may oscillate between grandiosity and self-loathing, believing themselves untouchable one moment and irredeemable the next. This inner conflict fuels destructive patterns, both inward and outward. They may lash out at loved ones, sabotage their own success, or seek out chaos just to feel something again. Because underneath it all, there's still a flicker of the old self, the part that remembers love, kindness, and humanity. But that flicker is buried under layers of pain, fear, and pride. And yet, despite everything, they continue forward. Not because they are strong, but because stopping would mean facing what they've become. And for many, that is more terrifying than anything else. By the time they reach this stage, the transformation is nearly complete. The good person is now a stranger, not only to the world, but to themselves. And yet, a part of them still whispers, quietly, barely audible through the layers of pain, that something is wrong. But they silence that voice again and again, because to listen would mean having to look at what they've become. This is what psychologists call moral injury. Unlike guilt, which is a response to doing something wrong, moral injury is the profound internal rupture caused by violating one's own moral code. It's the soul remembering the line that was crossed. And once it happens enough times, that rupture becomes a chasm. But most people don't see this happening. On the outside, the person may still function, hold a job, smile at neighbors, raise children. But on the inside, there's a hollow space where once lived empathy, joy, and love. That void hungers for something, anything to fill it. Some turn to violence, others to addiction. Some isolate completely, because facing others means risking exposure. And monsters don't want to be seen. There's another layer to this descent, identity fusion, the process by which the person fuses their pain with their sense of self. I am what I've survived. They begin to believe their trauma is their identity, their cruelty a badge of honor. It is no longer about justice or survival. It's about loyalty to the new self, the one forged in darkness. This creates a dangerous paradox. They both hate what they've become and fiercely defend it. They reject anyone who tries to help, attack those who hold up mirrors, because healing feels like betrayal, redemption feels like weakness, and forgiveness, both of self and others, feels impossible. They become suspicious of love, cynical of hope, dismissive of kindness. Not because these things are bad, but because they remind them of what they've lost, and the unbearable truth that it might still be recoverable. That terrifies them more than anything. At this point, some embrace the monster fully. They romanticize it, posture it, use it to gain respect, dominance, or revenge. But others begin to break under the weight of it all. Nightmares return, the mask slips, and for brief, agonizing moments, they feel the full gravity of their choices. The relationships destroyed, the innocence lost, the part of them that still remembers what it was like to be good. This is the crossroads, the moment of reckoning. Some step back from the edge, seek help, try to claw their way out of the abyss, but many fall deeper. Because to stop now would mean acknowledging every person they hurt, every bridge they burned, every time they chose the monster over the human. So now we stand at the end of this journey. A journey that didn't begin with malice, but with pain. A journey not of evil, but of survival twisted by suffering. And as we look back, one haunting truth remains. No one is born a monster. They are made through neglect, through trauma, through betrayal, through the unbearable silence of being unseen. But here's the final question we must ask. Is there a way back? Psychology says yes, but it's a narrow, brutal path. It demands accountability, humility, the willingness to confront not just what was done to you, but what you've done to others. It means mourning the person you used to be and grieving the damage you've caused. It's not for the faint of heart. Many try, most fail, but some make it. They emerge scarred, humbled, and changed, never fully innocent again, but human. And that is the paradox of monstrosity. Even the worst among us were once good. Even the most terrifying monsters cried once, loved once, hoped once. And that seed, buried under layers of rage and pain, might still be there, waiting. If we forget this, we dehumanize others, and worse, we blind ourselves to our own potential for darkness, because the scariest part isn't that good people become monsters. It's that we all can, under the right circumstances, with the right pressure, pain, and isolation. Any of us can cross that line. That's what makes this story so important. It's not just about them, it's about us. About the choices we make every day, the pain we carry, the anger we feed, the humanity we either nurture or abandon. So if you've seen the monster in yourself, know this: it's not too late. But the road back demands more courage than most are willing to face. It demands that you feel everything you've numbed, apologize for everything you've justified, and above all, choose to be better, even when it hurts. Because in the end, the real battle isn't between good and evil. It's between the human and the monster within. Thank you for watching this video. We kindly ask that you subscribe to our channel and like this video. Also, activate the notification bell so you're alerted to our next uploads. See you in the next video.